Jeffrey Sackfeld. So I wanted to shoot a quick video. Last week, the EO blog, Octane, so the Entrepreneurs Organization has a blog called Octane. They picked up one of my articles, reposted it on their website. I thought it was an interesting article they chose. So they often look at my inked articles and some of my blog posts and choose things to put onto their blog. And this one they chose was about decision making, and it was an older article. It must have been earlier this year, may have been late last year that I wrote this and posted it. But of all the articles, they picked this one, and it was interesting, and it reminds me how important sort of this topic is, or on how important what I talk about in the article is for entrepreneurs and CEOs, leadership teams in growth companies, either early stage or mid-market. And the article is about decision making. Specifically, it's about the difference between good and bad decisions and good and bad outcomes. So now that they're doing some yard work over here, I'm going to move to the other side of in Brooklyn. Got a client meeting this morning. But the difference between good and bad decisions and good and bad outcomes. And this is something that I came across many years ago. Had a chance to meet an author who wrote the book 21. And those who are familiar with the book know that it's essentially about a team of math gurus from MIT who figure out a way to essentially count cards, and they go off to Vegas and proceed to make a killing, several $100,000 of winnings. And it's a book about this experience. He was one of the team members. He was one of the people on the team from MIT who were counting cards, went to Vegas, raked in some cash. And he talks about this idea of good and bad decisions versus good and bad outcomes. And he gives this story of a bet. So they, in summary, basically they have a way of kind of keeping track of decks, and they figure out hot and cold decks. And when they realize that they've got a deck that is probably going to pay out well, they bring in a bigger player that starts making bigger bets. So they know on average they're going to win, which means they're going to have winnings, or they're going to have a net gain over things. But he says that they're looking at fairly small changes in that percentage. So it may only be a 5 or 10% advantage, which means that it's not a guaranteed thing. So he talks about this big bet where the odds are very much in their favor, and they're putting like $100,000 down, and he loses. And he says, well, the odds are still in their favor. The problem is they're not guaranteed. So even when you know that statistically it's the right decision to make, sometimes you have a bad outcome. So good bet, bad outcome. And he says a lot of times what happens is that you get thrown off by a particular outcome even though you made the right move. And he talks about having faced in that exact same situation again. He would bet that same amount again and again and again, knowing that sometimes he's going to win, sometimes he's going to lose, but on average, he is going to win. On average, he's going to come out ahead. So I think that happens a lot in business, where we have situations where it's not guaranteed, which are essentially a series of probabilities of potential outcomes, some of which are good and some of which are bad. But the problem is sometimes the chance, the luck of the draw, the roll of the dice in every situation could go either way. So I talk about this: good decisions, bad decisions, good outcomes, bad outcomes. And we basically create a matrix. And what we want to do is look at 4 possibilities. And I explain those possibilities based on kind of a situation, roll the dice, bet, roll the dice. And I say, if you were given a die and someone gave you a bet saying, I'm going to give you $10 if you can roll a 1, and I'm going to, so I give you a die, and I say that I'm going to give you $10 if you can roll a 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. If you roll a 1, you're going to give me $10, right? So it's basically you're going to a $10 gain if you roll 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, and it's a $10 loss if you roll a 1. So the question is, would you take that bet? Probability-wise, you've got a 5 in 6 chance of winning, 1 in 6 chance of losing. So it's a good bet. So I would take the bet. Now, if you take the bet and you roll a 3 and you win, right, you get $10. That's a good decision, good outcome. All right, so let's flip it around. If I say, well, look, I'm going to give you the die. If you roll a 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, you're going to have to give me $10. And if you roll a 1, I'm going to give you $10. Not probability-wise, not a good bet. I only have a 1 in 6 chance of winning. It's an even bet, so there's no odds on there. If I roll a 1, or if I say I roll a 3, in that case, sort of shame on me, right? Bad decision, bad outcome. Both of those are fairly clear. Here comes the rub, is if I give you that first bet, if you can roll a 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, I'm going to give you $10. If you roll a 1, you're going to give me $10, and you roll a 1, that's still a good decision, but you had a bad outcome. You had an improbable outcome that resulted in a bad outcome. So that's the other matrix. So I've got good decisions, good outcome, good decision, bad outcome, and then I have bad decision, bad outcome, which I covered. And let's look at the other one. So if I take the bet on if I give you the die, if you roll a 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, you're going to pay me $10. If you roll a 1, I'm going to pay you $10. You take the die, you roll a 1. Right? Good outcome. Right? You're going to win $10 in that case. But the question is, was that a good decision? It was a good outcome, but was it a good decision? And this is where I think a lot of people get tripped up. I would say that's still a bad decision. Even though you had a particularly good outcome in one case, it's still a bad decision. And the problem is entrepreneurs and as business owners and as business executives and leaders that are trying to make these decisions and trying to deal with these different probabilities, I think we often fall into these cases. The good decision, good outcome, and the bad decision, bad outcome are a little clear, but it gets muddled when we have potentially good decisions but bad outcomes, and potentially bad decisions but with good outcomes. And I think that skews our ability to learn and skews our ability to make better decisions in the future. So the question is how do we know? The only way we really know is to really think through and document and to articulate how we are making a decision, the information that we had on the decision, our rationale over particular options, our assessment of probabilities in those options. And then once we have outcomes, is to be able to go back and look at that and say, all right, well, were those correct or were those not? Was I missing key information? Did I make a misstep? Did I not make an assumption that was bad? Did I not incorporate a piece of information or data? And I have to look at my decision-making process and say, okay, well, look, it was actually a good decision-making process. The information that I now have, I really could not know beforehand, or the outcome that we're dealing with was an improbable outcome. So I need to remember that is still a good decision. I just need to know that there are different outcomes possible. Or maybe I find out that, hey, you know what, I missed a key step, or I missed a piece of information, or I didn't ask a key question. So those are things that I can actually incorporate into my decision-making process. And I think that's one thing that really good teams do, is they get better at making decisions, and the way they get better at making decisions, review decisions they've made, and the thinking and the logic and the data they had at the time, and then seeing what the outcomes were, what new information came up after the fact, and figure out what could they do differently, what new information could they incorporate, what process could they go through. So I think that's the reason that Inc. put this on the blog, or reposted it on their blog, because I think it does come up. I think it's a core capability. I'll put the link to the article below. I'll say this is one of those things that I put in the team building process when I work with a team on launching or kind of rebooting a team or boosting a team. We look at their decision-making process, and are they stuck, or do they have blind spots in their decision-making that we can improve through process, through the right questions, through checklists, things like that. So think about it. I would love to hear your stories, love to hear your examples. If you have any questions, email me, info@eckfeldt.com. I would love to talk more about it. This is one of those kind of things around strategy and decision making that I love to kind of contemplate, and I love examples for. So if you have an example, I'd love to see it. If you have a question, I'd love to hear it. Looking forward to talking with you more.